We are fundamentally changing business as usual. What does a grade 1, 2, 3 classroom across 75 districts in UP needs to do? Children were in movie halls and malls before they were back to schools. That's just wrong. Small is beautiful, scale is necessary. That's the reality of solving education in India.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chat Masala. Really excited to invite Shaveta Sharma-Kukreja. She's the managing director and was part of the founding team at Central Square Foundation, India's leading philanthropic organization focused on school education. Before she co-led CSF's strategy, operations, and strategic partnerships, she worked at BCG and Citibank and specializes in systems adoption at scale and leadership and organizational behavior. Very much looking forward to getting into Shaveta's journey. But in addition to that, what can be done to really transform education in the coming decades here in India and across the world? Shaveta, welcome.
Thank you.
Lovely. Would love to begin with your thoughts around your career. You began with your MBA and then a corporate career at BCG and Citibank. What led you to take the leap and join the development sector at CSF?
So I have a fairly simplistic articulation of this. I should rehearse a more thought-provoking answer to this. But CAT and MBA happened because I'm a product of my times. At that time, if you had half a brain, you wrote your CAT and you hoped you get into a really good business school. I was fortunate enough to get into IIM Bangalore. I think 2 incredible years, learned a lot. Though in hindsight, I'm also a generation where most of us went to business school with no prior work experience. So you're going through a professional degree with incredible professors who have academic and industry experience. My journey started with an incredible education from one of the best institutes in the country, but without any work experience. So for me, the rubber hit the road when I first started working.
Understood.
And I'll just backtrack. When I was in University of Delhi, I'm a generation where the question you got asked was, where do you see yourself 20 years hence? I think in today's gig economy, it's more like, what do you see yourself doing 1 year at a time?
Maybe 2, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? But it was very acceptable to have long-term plans. But the desire was always to work in an NGO. I'm also a generation where the terms I knew was NGO organizations or not-for-profit. I did not know impact investing. I did not know development sector. I did not know sustainable development goals. They weren't on the horizon then. So CAT was more a result of the times. My generation was fortunate enough to get placed on day 0, which is a big load off in business school. That's how BCG happened. I think consulting firms are great to ground you in basic problem solving and analytic. Was fortunate enough to be in a international strategy consulting firm at my first job. This was also still a time the firm was getting set up and nurtured. The India practice was getting set up with a lot of European guidance. So I think really got to learn from the best. But because I hadn't worked before, consulting became a little more meta for me than I was comfortable with. It was still more abstract. This was still when strategy consulting in India, on an average, a project would be 3 months in a year. In my 2 years at BCG, I worked on 6 different projects. Whereas I wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to kind of roll up my sleeves and really get a flavor for how work gets done before I could see myself advising others to do that work done. I've been fortunate to have great mentors in my career, and I was then strongly advised to complete the 2-year stint, but then make a switch sooner rather than later. And that's how I moved to the industry. Worked with a BPO startup for 3 years. It was a collections call center. And my last corporate stint, I moved to Citibank, where as a part of their credit group, I was running credit card collections. So this kind of became a more conventional, you go to a good business school, you get a good placement, and then you figure your way around. That's the first decade of my journey.
For young people in college right now, I think there are 2 schools of thought, which is, okay, join a big company and understand what those best practices are internationally, build that network. Afterward, you can strike out on your own and follow your passion. Do you recommend that, or do you recommend joining a smaller organization and helping to build it out. What would you guide a young person today in similar shoes?
Yeah. I mean, the default is to do something entrepreneurial early on, right? Join a young startup, grow with it, shape it, learn on the job. Again, I don't have a binary advice on, and I don't think one size fits all. I think it's also important to know how strong your own conviction about it is. Am I joining a young startup? Am I wanting to take an entrepreneurial journey only because that's what's cool? Or do I think I am ready to take that plunge? I do think there's merit. There's huge merit in working with a large organization, learning structures, learning processes, learning from some really best people and minds. But it's not necessarily for everyone, right? It's also quite easy to feel like I'm a small cog in this mammoth machinery of the corporate, right? I mean, BCG in India was very young when I joined. But Citibank, Citibank is, you can't run a bank at the scale at which they do without it being very, very structured with a lot of processes, with, a person for every role and KRAs for every person and role. I do think there's merit in going through that rigor, going through that discipline, showing up and delivering to what you're being held accountable for. And I think it prepares you better to then strike it with a young org and shape it. What a younger team allows you to do at times is establish more meaningful relationships across the organizations, right? You kind of get up in the evening for your chai break and you know everyone around you. Whereas in a larger setup, after a point, you will not know everyone in your own department either, right? Okay. So a big global brand going to a new geography will still go with do's and don'ts and processes and protocols because they want to be true to their brand. Whereas if you truly join a startup, then you're learning on the job, which is for me happened both with my BPO stint as well as for Central Square Foundation, right? You're learning and growing as the organization is growing into that area and sector.
Got it. So I think the lesson is you need to reflect, you need to introspect, really understand your talents, passions, aspirations, where you are, what skills you need to build, and what path would help you incorporate those skills as effectively as possible.
Sorry, if I may add, sometimes having a strong brand on your profile is also helpful. I know it might be a slightly unpopular thing to share, but especially because when we're talking about young professionals thinking through their career options, the upside of having worked with a strong, established, credible organization, which is a strong brand, then you carry the credibility of having worked in that setup. And I think that can also work in favor of
Makes a
young
lot of
professionals.
sense. And I think that's great advice to young people today. How do you then, because you mentioned that at BCG, things were really abstract because you had gone straight from StarCC to IIM to BCG without work experience. How did you then make the transition to your BPO and CSF role? And because I found that it's sometimes difficult to go from that consulting mindset of, okay, here, I'm 60,000 feet up in the air and looking at this system to getting on the ground, rolling up your sleeves and making things happen. What helped you in that transition?
See, again, I think, you are right. It can be a bit of a stretch, right? From 60,000 to 20,000 to down in the weeds. But again, it goes back to how strong is your conviction about what you really want to do. Because I've not worked before and BCG, converted for me on day zero, which is like the premium placement option. So that was incredible, right? But going in, would I have known what my role would be? Does it speak to my skill set or what I'm looking for? It's still in the abstract, right? Sometimes these things don't really work out intuitively. You have to experience it. I think for me, it was the opportunity was to make a switch to really get my hands dirty, roll up my sleeves and do something functional. Very fortunately for me, and this is around 2002, that's where the whole business process and knowledge process outsourcing industry in India was getting established, getting a lot of credibility, right? We know the Genpact and the Spectramind story. So for me, the option of what industry to switch to in a way became the easiest decision, right? The personal constraint was I wanted to be in Delhi, which made it easier to switch to the BPO than to say a more conventional FMCG or financial services industry. That's what led to Global Vantage, the BPO startup, which I stayed with for 3 years, moved to Citibank. The move to Central Square Foundation in a different sector, I think what worked in my favor was I was on an organic break when I had my kids. So I was on maternity. What it allowed me to do was also to reflect and think harder about what I want the second phase of my career to look like. I actually got into teaching because while I was on maternity and enjoying that immensely, I also needed something to keep my grey cells alive. And the easy option was to become a visiting faculty or a guest lecturer in business schools in and around Delhi. Went ahead and wrote my UGC net, was very seriously considering should I go for a PhD and make academia my career. The right decision at that point would have been to go abroad for a PhD, which my personal commitments didn't sit well with. It gave me the chance to really reflect harder, right? You're anyways on a break. You're not in a rush to join back. This is the time when development sector in India was really priming up for growth. The world was talking about sustainable development goals. You can't achieve any goal at a global level unless you achieve it for India, right? Any goal comes to developing South. In developing South, just by disproportionate size of India as a country, you got to solve the issue in India, right? So there are sustainable development goals. There's interest not just from multilaterals and bilaterals, but international foundations wanting to be a part of the solution for India. And also young India was getting rich quicker, right? I spoke about the liberalization and why in my times MBA was the right thing to do, right? The economy was growing. Young India was rich sooner and they wanted to give back. Rahul, I strongly feel India has always had a giving culture, right? We look at our steel plants, we will look at our industry, all industrial houses invested in a school, in a hospital, in a temple, in a Silai Kendra. Like, the industrial townships got built with the whole premise of you're contributing to building that society. Now what was happening was young India was making a lot of money, significantly more than their parents' generation had seen. But they did not want to give as a part of their legacy, right? I don't want it to be a part of my will. I want to give my money sooner and I want to shape that agenda. So those are all the factors which made development sector really come into its own and start seeing a lot of positive activity. What it also meant was that the sector now had space for somebody with my kind of profile. What I brought to the table was basic general management skills and smarts, right? I moved to development and education. The managerial skills and experience and perspective that I could bring to the sector, there was now a meaningful way to leverage that. So that's how the switch happened for me.
It's very interesting. It reminds me of back in the day, we had to read Good to Great, which is a leading management text. But there was also an addendum, Good to Great for the social sector. And Jim Collins talked about how a lot of the same principles that run effective organizations in the corporate sector can be applied to the social sector. To what extent do you think that's true? And what specific insights from business school, from consulting, from corporate, more generally, did you find coming in really handy in your education nonprofit work?
So let me first start with what is required when, one is making significant career decisions. I genuinely feel switching from a BCG to a BPO to a Citibank is more power to the cause, right? It's very typical of my business school cohort. I think most of us took the first 5-7 years to figure out where our heart is, where we really want to grow roots. But when we're talking about switching from the industry to the development sector, from corporate, for-profit to development, I think the first principle it's very important to keep in mind is, most important is learnability and adaptability. You can't switch a sector with just the self-belief that I've been there, done that, know it all. I've risen to a certain position or I've seen certain success and, I'll kind of figure it out. So you can't wing it. So genuinely entering a new sector with the respect that it deserves, right? Something about the sector has attracted you. Continue to be curious about it and give yourself time and a learning curve to familiarize yourself with the sector, right? And all things do not work the same way. The principles remain the same, but the way the sector operates is different. So I just want to put that up front, right? Let's start.
A certain humility, like just be curious, understand.
Be curious, come with the intent of, I will need to learn. This is a new sector. This is a new industry. There are different ways of working. There is a different cohort of people I'll be engaging with, right? It's no longer more PLUs, people like us. There'll be a difference when you move even within the same industry. And when you're moving across sectors, then it becomes even more stark in some way. Let's say humility and curiosity, learnability and adaptability is important, right? It's not like I have a magic potion to offer and everyone just needs to listen to that. So I think just putting that up front. I fundamentally believe people, organization, and institutions have more in common than we give it credit. The way you would manage a team or work with your people in a for-profit, in a consulting firm, or in a FMCG company, or in the financial services industry, I think people would want to be treated in the same way. People are people, right? And that's what I always say. People are people, organizations are organizations. The way you engage with people, processes, and partners, the principles are common, but they need to fit into at what stage of the sector and the organization you're in. For example, banking in India is definitely a more mature sector compared to the development sector. Within the development sector, when we were starting out as Central Square Foundation, we were honestly the new kids on the block. The sector already had some incredible organizations with incredible leaders talking all the sensible things, doing all the sensible work, right? So you have to know that you have to gain your credibility and earn the respect of the sector. And then how you start engaging either with the people you hire and the team that you build, the processes you start setting up, right? I mean, most of us tend to think about institutionalization 5 years into the organizational journey and not from day one. But somewhere the die starts getting cast fairly early on, right? And it's better to be more deliberate about it than let it happen to the organization. And partners is a function of all stakeholders you work with. I think that layer gets a little more nuanced or complex in the development sector just because of the diversity of stakeholders, from government and policy on one end to the beneficiaries that we seek to make a difference to their lives. And I think those principles are common. The nuance in which you apply them vary.
Would love to explore this more specifically. So you're saying organizations in different industries and at different stages in their evolution you may need to apply these principles differently. Can you break that down for our listeners? How might a principle be applied differently to a new nonprofit like CSF when it was coming up the ranks, as opposed to a more established counterpart? Can you help break that down for us?
I'll take our own example, right? I think we were audacious enough or crazy enough to say, even when we started, that we want to make a difference to the system. As CSF, we were very clear we are not here to run an education program. We want to partner with the government and help them be a catalytic partner, give leverage to their government programs. To be completely honest, did we have a clear operating model in our mind way back in 2012-13 on how we would do it? Not really, right? It started by going out and meeting a lot of government stakeholders, seeing what would it take to engage with them, service them, really understanding and diagnosing what are the issues they face and why are solutions not sticking, right? I mean, the premise is, in almost all cases, government knows what the issues are. They're already thinking through solutions, but there are reasons solutions are not sticking, right? So when we first started out, for us, it meant casting a wider net, going out and learning from other education NGOs on how they work with the government, going out and learning from other NGOs, not in education, but in other sectors who've learned to partner better with the government. And to now, 11 years into the journey, today, if we talk about what CSF strategic priorities are, how we are able to work with the government, we have a much better sense on our own operating model of what a CSF partnership with a government counterpart would look like. So the principle of system reform or wanting to make a difference to education at scale in partnership with the government was common to CSF since we started, continues to be a core principle. But our own clarity on the operating model, the kind of staffing we need, the kind of people we need, the kind of engagement we need has evolved over time.
Okay. We have a way of saying this. We talk about the synthesis of idealism and pragmatism, that you need to be extremely idealistic, like keep that vision alive. a CSF would do in its early years may be different from what it does perhaps now.
Yeah.
I think that's...
And you get smarter on the job, right? You just learn to understand the stakeholder. I think you build your own understanding and sometimes also your own assessment of what we are capable of and what we are not capable of. I think especially in the development sector, the need for going beyond piecemeal solutions and looking at integrated system solutions is so dire, especially in school education, right? And I think that's a journey an organization needs to undergo itself to really understand that where can I fit into this puzzle? What part or what lever can I contribute to this complex production function of education, as we call it?
Understood. You talked about the kind of implementation gaps. How is CSF bridging that? Because I think we all want to see a more robust education sector. And a lot of people understand the challenges that we're facing. A lot of people have solutions. Where is the gap in your assessment? And how can everybody contribute toward that? I'm saying, there may be viewers or their parents who are like, I want to be part of this journey. How can I evaluate the foundations, the measures that are really moving the needle? What's giving us, from an impact standpoint, the greatest return on investment? Yeah. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Chat Masala. Before we move on with this insightful conversation, please be sure to subscribe and follow us so we can continue expanding our minds together.
So for that, the answer is very simple. And I'll limit myself to school education. That's what CSF works in. If you're looking for a bang for the buck for school education in India at scale, the way to do is work with a partner and look for institutionalization of ideas. In the development sector, it's often said that India, when it comes to education in the development sector, we are a minefield of successful pilots, but failed scale-ups. So typically, if I come up with a great idea, I find a donor who's willing to fund that great idea, I'll find my own people, I'll find my own process. And when all degrees of control are in my hand, then in a small limited geography, I'll show incredible results for 2 to 3 years. But Rahul, what are we saying? There's donor money, NGOs own people, process, and complete control, and evaluation showing great results. All of that, this is wonderful and is making tangible impact to the cohort of children who went through that intervention for that period. However, when the funding comes to an end, then we are back to ground zero, right? We haven't institutionalized it as a business as usual. In the development sector, we are talking about kids who come from the most underserviced communities. Most of these children will go to a government school in their neighborhood. And unless all great silver bullets and, incredible levers of change ideas, unless we design for institutionalization within the government system, they are a band-aid, but they are temporary by nature. Either due to lack of funding or due to different priorities or due to people challenges, that band-aid will wear off over time. What the system needs is a more integrated solution. And for that, the change has to come at a policy level.
Got it.
The good news in the education context today, and I'll take a couple of minutes to talk about it, is during COVID, India launched its National Education Policy 2020. As a country, we have a new education policy almost after 3 decades, more than 3 decades. Again, during COVID, the policy was put into action. One of the main ideas, very central to the policy, is the focus on early learning. And it's quite intuitive, right? Basic problem solving tells us go to the root of the problem and start with the first step. If I start fixing the third step and the first and second step are broken, then, the throughput will not reach there, right? And we got to solve for learning problems at the earliest when they begin. And unfortunately, in our country, they begin very much at the entry level. Our youngest children are not learning. The policy went ahead and said that if we do not solve for early learning, then whatever rest the policy talks about secondary or tertiary education is a moot point, right? Because the quality of input in terms of the learning levels of children which will move to the middle school or secondary school is weak, right? So you got to fundamentally fix that. Not only does the NEP call out centrality of early education, the Ministry of Education followed it up with a national mission for early learning. We call it foundational literacy and numeracy. Very simply put, by literacy, it means ability to read with meaning in the local language of the state. We do not mean English. And numeracy. Very simply put, samajh ke padhna, and to know how to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And Rahul, I fundamentally believe we are not talking academic or cognitive skills. These are life skills. Whether a person grows up to be a blue collar worker, a white collar worker, or entrepreneur, sets up a thela, in a local market, or chooses to be a homemaker. If you're not able to read with meaning and do basic math, how do you transact life? The country is moving towards digital benefit transfers. Even if all I want to do is avail of the benefits my country is providing me, how do I transact or understand any of those without basic literacy and numeracy, right? So MOE then launched Nipun Bharat. It's a national mission for foundational literacy and numeracy and made funding available. There's funding of 2,700 crores every year that the Ministry of Education is making available to all states to adopt and launch their early learning missions in the country. And I think this journey, right, from policy to a mission which has funding behind it, is what becomes the first step of institutionalizing change and reform.
Understood. So there are all these pilots going on. People bring together a set of stakeholders and here, let's try to drive this change. They adopt a school or a district. And as you said, it's kind of like a Band-Aid, then, it comes out. So who evaluates all the pilots and says, hey, this is working really well. This can be institutionalized. I presume that some pilots can be institutionalized more than others or with more ease than others, right? Is that one thing that CSF does? Does the government do that? How are we making decisions on what to scale up?
So Rahul, the way you phrase it, nobody's doing that. The way you phrase the question. And let's also understand, as if I'm government, it's not my job to do this.
Yeah.
It's not my job to do it, right? Typically, an NGO will approach a district administration, get permission to run the pilot, but then forget to engage the district administration in most cases on a regular basis, right? It's a non-financial contract. As government, I am happy that you're bringing funding and resources that will serve a issue, serve a sectors, in my administration better. But beyond that, typically NGOs don't always systematically keep the government administration engaged. We start with their permission. There is some low-touch engagement. We will go back and show our results. But then we worry about how will it get institutionalized at the end of the pilot. We have to start thinking scale and institutionalization at the first step. The premise of working at the district should be, how can this shape the agenda for the entire state? Where it's an afterthought. And also, by the way, the reality of all of this is bureaucrats get transferred. Typical senior civil servants, the senior people will get posted at the state capitals, but say a chief development officer or a district collector or a district magistrate is typically a young IAS officer who will be in that position on an average for about 18 to 24 months. So by the time the pilot has run its course, we've gone through a cycle of bureaucratic transfers. And these are practical challenges, right? However, that doesn't absolve the supply side of these solutions to continue to keep the government engaged. I fundamentally believe it's not the government's job to do this evaluation and learn. It's our responsibility when we are taking philanthropic capital and trying out new ideas with the government permission. It's non-financial for the government for sure. But if the pathway is government adoption, then how are we keeping the government stakeholder engaged? The second issue with evaluation is it's unfortunately very expensive and hence doesn't get done at scale as rigorously and as frequently as it should be. The whole assessment and evaluation of pilots within, or of programs within education is going through an interesting evolution. But it's still expensive. It's genuinely outpriced. So then if I'm an NGO, I need a donor who'll pay my program cost. I also need a donor who'll pay my evaluation cost. And I also need a donor who will understand that this is a slow burn process. I can deliver incredible results, but for those results to get embedded within the government system will require constant engagement at the bureaucratic level. And that takes time and effort, right? Typically programs get funded for, you're working with one school and you need 5 resources in the school. What about the 3 other resources who need to stay in touch with the district, who need to think through the evaluation, who need to be in touch with policy? So I think thinking of institutionalization, scale, what it means for policy at a large scale level, The challenge has been that we come to it at the end of a successful pilot and not at the start of the idea of a pilot and a program.
So what does that mean? So if, an NGO is working with a particular district, they have kind of a new method of teaching literacy and numeracy in a more effective manner. Yeah. Maybe there's some research on developmental,
or just better teaching learning materials.
Got it. Yeah. They implemented at a set of schools here. Okay, great. There's a 20%, 25% increase in whatever parameters we're looking for. They go show it to the IAS officer who's partnering with them. Now you're saying we need to think about institutionalization from the beginning.
Absolutely.
What does that mean exactly? Yeah. Like if I were an NGO who really cares about implementing this on a broader scale.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, and this is the journey we've gone through as CSF, right? Like for the first 5 years, we were primarily also grant-making organizations. We helped incubate and fund a lot of young social entrepreneurs who were setting up their own NGOs. And our premise was that we'll come up with new catalytic ideas and better ways, not just based on research, but pragmatic delivery. That, hey, this is how you really need to teach, right? Or this teaching learning material or this coaching support to the teachers leads to better learning outcome. The premise was that then these ideas, through policy notes and engagement with bureaucracy, will find a way to get institutionalized and adopted by the system. No surprise, we're looking at world in a very linear manner. And we're working in the assumption that the system is waiting to be told what to do. That is not the reality. India as a country has been running schools since we gained independence for the last 75 years. If you were to Google the Indian education system, some of the best research papers are written by commissions and committees put in place by the government. There's Justice Verma Committee, there's a Kothari Commission, right? So government has been working on the issue and is aware of the challenges. When we switched to our focus on foundational literacy and numeracy, for us, the first step became engaging with the state leadership, the state bureaucrats who are leading the departments of education on, let's prioritize foundational literacy and numeracy. Let's do a diagnostic of what the program today looks like. Let's identify areas which can be strengthened, need to be improved, align with them and change the design at a state level. So, for example, Uttar Pradesh is a state that we started working in 2019. Both Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, our work on FLN started in October and September 2019, whereas NEP only came out in 2020. Nipun Bharat Mission came out in 21. So these were states where through our, outreach and engagement, we were able to get the state committed to, okay, let's solve for early learning at a state level. It wasn't a national mission at that point in time. The next step meant taking a look at how current early learning processes are run in their schools. What is the teaching learning material? What are the teachers doing? What's teacher training? What's the kind of support mechanisms? What are governance and assessment mechanisms? What are the deltas that the NGO sector as technical advisors can support? For example, both for MP and UP, we are working with NGOs who have proven results in their pilots. But when they came with us as coalition partners for Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, they were not looking for their pilots to scale. They came as technical advisors to the government.
Okay.
We'll do a diagnostic, we'll identify the gap. We have a certain expertise, but we will co-create what you want to be the solution for UP. We will co-create what you want the solution to be, Madhya Pradesh. Who are we kidding if we think we can walk into a government education system and say, I've figured it out, let me tell you what to do. That's not how any social change can work. And it's not about humility, it's about being practical. There is a system which is running. And I think for us, that shift to say, let's start with scale at the very start, at the onset. And let's get partners who are supporting the government as a technical advisor, who are not in a way selling their program. I've done a pilot, it has worked, all you need to do is replicate. Because also most pilots are not replicable. Most pilots run with additional staff. Who in the government setup will fund for that additional staff? What Philanthropy can fund for a district in UP, no Philanthropy can fund at scale of UP, which is 75 districts. I mean, we all know, right? If UP was an independent country, it would be in the top. Yeah, largest. Exactly, right? It would be somewhere in the 6th to 8th, right? It just happens to be a state in our country. That's how large the issue is. Philanthropy can fund a pilot in a few districts. But to take it to scale in UP with 75 districts, or Madhya Pradesh with 52 districts, or even Gujarat with 33 districts, is where the funding that the government is putting into education needs to be done more mindfully, more deliberately, more resourcefully. And I think that shift of partnering with the government as a technical advisor, rather than wanting to scale my own NGO program, is for us has been the way to work with the system at scale.
Understood. Instead of like, okay, I've got this model and trying to pitch it to the government, almost selling it to the government, it has to be a long-term collaboration. Hey, we're here with you for the long run. We run these experiments. Let's talk about, so the discussion on
the learnings from the experiments, right? If I think I ran a pilot and it was successful, can I codify what are the things I did which made it successful? Can that codified knowledge be transferred to the government system? I mean, education system in India employs more people than any other sector, more than health and railways.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The largest workforce that government employs in India is in the education system.
Everyone says it's railways. That's not true. Okay.
No, it's, I'm pretty sure about my fact, but we can check after the conversation. The point I'm making is that the money that government is always already putting towards the education system, any philanthropy would be, and there are different cuts people take, whether it's only domestic money or foreign funding, would still be in the range of 3.5% of the government budget. If that's all that I'm contributing, how then that at best can serve a catalytic role. Now, what I've learned from my pilot, what are those practices that I have to find a way for the government to adopt in its own program, in how it runs its school. And one other premise, at least in all our work, and in a lot of states we work with our partner organizations, is to say that Nipun Bharat is, Nipun UP or Nipun Haryana or Mission Ankur as it's called in Madhya Pradesh, it's not a zero period. Typically, NGOs work in a zero period, right? आपके बच्चे आ रहे हैं, पढ़ रहे हैं, we'll come and do the zero period and help them read.
Come 1 hour earlier.
Come 1 hour early, stay back 1 hour late, or we'll do something in the community. That is not institutionalization.
Yeah.
When people ask me, so in UP, Nipun is in which period of the timetable? The timetable is Nipun Uttar Pradesh. The way Hindi is taught, irrespective of किस कालांश में वो है, मतलब किस period में वो है, पूरे दिन का जो आपका कालांश है वो निपुण उत्तर प्रदेश के लिए है. आप उसमें हिंदी कैसे पढ़ा रहे हैं, मैथ कैसे पढ़ा रहे हैं, मौखिक भाषा, all the skills, right?
I see the difference. It's not a zero period or a seventh period.
Whatever, I can't fix what you're doing on a daily basis. Let me give a supplement. That only gets us so far.
It's nutrition, not it's like, okay,
we are fundamentally changing business as usual. What does a grade 1, 2, 3 classroom across 75 districts in UP needs to do? Now I know that from design to deployment and behavior and practice change as the last mile, what we call deepening the FLN journey, we are still at the start of it, right? Nipun Bharat got launched in 2021. But because of COVID, we had one of the longest schools closures in the world, unfortunately, were in India. It breaks my heart, but somewhere we got away doing that. Children were in movie halls and malls before they were back to schools. That's just wrong. Right? That is just wrong. All media spoke about was 10th board and 12th board. As a mother to a kid in 10th this year, I fully empathize with the pressure a high school student goes through, right? And they become, not for the right reasons, they become more fundamental and career-defining years for you. So I fully understand the media interest was on what will happen to boards, CBSE will reschedule, how will cutoffs for universities get decided. What about our youngest children? They got no help and support, right? So, but in this context, Nipun Bharat has actually reached our classrooms only for the last one academic year, 2022-23, and I'll make a generalization. Typical academic year in India is April to March. So the first time the intended national mission for foundational literacy and numeracy reaching classrooms in the hands of a teacher, in that moment of truth with the student, first happened in 2022. So we've only seen one academic year. But the fact that states have designed solutions for scale, they are funded by the state government budgets. Central government is making money available for Nipun. The role for philanthropy, the role for donors, the role for NGOs, the role for all your audience who has, good ideas or is curious or wanting to make a difference, they have to get embedded into how the state wants to do its solutioning. Iteration has to be in practice. It cannot be a theoretical concept. I mean, don't get me wrong, the lab idea is beautiful. But like one of the founders of BRAC, one of the largest international NGOs in education said, right? I mean, they do incredible work in Bangladesh. Small is beautiful, scale is necessary. That's the reality of solving education in India.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think I received a full course on the challenges that the education sector is facing. Coming back to some advice for young people, what are 3 skills you would love young people to focus on today in 2023?
Learnability. Chat GPT and AI, what skill is replaceable by computers and analytics and AI? We don't know. So over-invest in learnability. Groom yourself to be ready to learn what the new skill is. I think that would be one of the most important skills. Second, and I might sound old world, but respect and empathy. I think not necessarily only a fault of the younger generation, but they get raised with more entitlement and privileges and more easy access and instant gratification, whether it's just a like on social media. I think more respect and empathy and knowing that it takes a village. We say it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a tribe to reach success. I think that would be a very, very important skill. And third is resilience. I mean, again, a lot of your young audience are, applying for admissions or looking to start out their careers. But grit and resilience, I can't underscore that enough, right? For most of us, life is not a linear line of success. And sometimes the most interesting life experiences are when we take some detours. Not all of them are deliberate. Some get forced upon us. So, I mean, I think learnability, respect and empathy, grit and resilience.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Kind of related, what's one value you hold dear that has guided you through life?
Integrity. I sleep like a baby and I value that. And I just want to be able to look myself in the mirror and smile.
Lovely. If you're trapped on a desert island and you could only have one book with you, which one would it be?
Pride and Prejudice.
Oh.
It's my favorite classic.
Okay. Lovely. Anything in particular that you love about this classic?
It was one of the first classics I read in the unabridged. And the power of words, right? I think that was one of the first books I read where I could almost visualize the story. I could visualize what characters were feeling. And I think the way it brings out the complexity of human relationships. And I think all characters are honest and true to where they're coming from. And I think that's been one of my favorite parts about that book.
Lovely. Thank you. A couple more. Excellence is blank.
Excellence is passion. If you are committed to what you're trying to aim for, you will figure the path and make it work.
What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew as a 20-year-old?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting one. It's okay to fail along the way. Not everything will work out the way you envisaged. And some of the best decisions were best only for that time. But you learn more when things don't work out versus when things work out. And own the downs, own the lows.
Ooh, okay. Well, I think that's hard to do. Lovely. And the last one we ask everyone, what's one change you would love to see in the world about a decade from now, 2035, let's say?
I'd like to see a world where every 12-year-old girl can dream of a life, irrespective of her gender, and irrespective of the ovarian lottery, irrespective of the house that she was born into, like a world of equal opportunity and I mean, not just from a socio-economic perspective, but also from a gender perspective.
Of course, that's a beautiful thought. Shaveta, thank you so much for sharing all your insights. Really learned a lot.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, Rahul.
Of course.